You felt it. Maybe not in words, maybe not even in thoughts, but in that stillness between your conversations, in the pause between laughter and silence, you noticed something. A vacancy, a presence that wasn't quite present. You looked into someone's eyes, perhaps a friend, a stranger, someone you've shared a life with, and despite everything appearing normal, something in you whispered, "No one is home." They smiled. They nodded. They knew when to laugh. Their words were timed perfectly, stitched together from the cultural script. But behind the timing, behind the voice and the mask, there was no resonance. You felt like you were speaking into a cave where no echo returned. That moment stayed with you, not because it was dramatic, but because it was too quiet to ignore. Something didn't just feel off. It felt hollow. And what haunted you wasn't that they were lying. It was that they weren't anything. We've been trained to assume everyone is like us, that inside every body is a self, a spirit, a spark. But what if that's not true? Not everyone you see is fake. Not everyone is evil. But some are empty, not metaphorically, not emotionally, spiritually, like a canvas that's been primed but never painted, like a mirror that reflects but never sees. Ancient mystics hinted at it. Philosophers danced around it. Modern consciousness researchers echo the same silent suspicion. Some people are missing the flame. They operate, they replicate, they perform, but they do not burn. These are not simply unkind people, not broken ones. These are what the Gnostics warned us about, what some today call organic portals. Their function is not to destroy. It's to sustain the illusion, to keep the stage full, to make you believe you're surrounded by realness, even when the room is full of masks. But this isn't about finger pointing. It's about clarity, discernment. Because before you can tell who is soulless, you must first understand what it means to have a soul. And that journey begins now. Before you can name the absence, you have to know the presence. Because soulless is not just a dramatic insult. It's not about mood or mindset. It's not about being cold, distant, or depressed. To be soulless is to lack interiority, not emotion, not intellect, but the flame that watches behind the eyes. And to truly grasp what that means, you must first unlearn what culture has taught you about the soul. It's not a cartoonish orb floating in the chest. It's not granted by ritual or religion. The soul is the inner witness, the silent depth behind your thoughts, the part of you that pauses before reacting. It's the field of stillness that listens beneath the noise. You can't touch it, but you can sense it. In the weight behind someone's gaze, in the quiet between their words, in the raw, unfiltered quality of their presence. And when that presence is missing, you feel it. You feel it in your bones. The conversation feels scripted. Their kindness feels rehearsed. Their eyes look back at you, but they don't really see you. There's movement, yes, but no depth, no tension, no contrast. It's like watching a shadow try to mimic a human. This is not about superiority. It's not about looking down on others or dividing the world into enlightened and asleep. It's about recognizing a real phenomenon, one that's been whispered across spiritual traditions, hidden in ancient texts, and now resurfacing in modern consciousness circles with renewed urgency. The term organic portal is new, but the concept is old. Long before psychology gave us labels like narcissist or sociopath, mystics spoke of hollow vessels, beings that walk among us but do not dream, do not reflect, do not seek. They mimic humanity without inhabiting it. They are emotionally functional, often charming, even helpful. But something vital is missing. Not just empathy, not just conscience, but the very spark that allows a being to question itself, to transform, to suffer meaningfully. Some call it karma. Some say it's soul development over lifetimes. Some believe they are simply background characters in a vast simulation. But whatever the mechanism, the experience is the same. A being that looks like you, speaks like you, moves through the world like you. And yet, when you really feel into them, there's no transmission. You shine your light and nothing reflects back. You share your truth and it vanishes like mist. You reach out and your hand passes through a mask. This is not metaphor. This is not fantasy. This is pattern recognition. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It starts in moments too small to explain. You're mid-conversation with someone you've known for years, a friend, a parent, a partner, and something doesn't land. You're saying something real, something vulnerable, something that should stir something human. But the response feels off. It's not unkind. It's not aggressive. In fact, it's exactly what they're supposed to say. I'm sorry you feel that way. You're strong. You'll get through it. Everything happens for a reason. The words arrive like product packaging, shiny, expected, and utterly hollow. At first, you question yourself. Maybe you're overthinking it. Maybe they're just tired, distracted, going through something. But the pattern repeats. Over and over again, these exchanges feel one-sided. Not because they don't listen, but because they can't meet you where you actually are. You try sharing deeper truths, mystical moments, raw emotions, existential thoughts, and what comes back is a glazed-over nod, a polite smile, or a quick pivot to something surface level. The sacred moment dies before it can breathe, and here's the part that's hardest to accept. Sometimes these people are the ones closest to you, the ones you grew up with, the ones who raised you, the ones who, for years, you assumed understood you, or at least loved you. But now, with this new inner clarity, you begin to notice something disturbing. They never really saw you, not the real you. They loved the idea of you, the version of you that didn't rock the boat, the mask you wore to survive, the you that mirrored them. But the deeper you, the part of you that awakens, that questions, that carries soul, was always alone in the room. This isn't about blame. This isn't about throwing away your family or your past. It's about telling the truth, quietly and without apology. Some people in your life have never once met the real you, because they can't, because they're not built to, because the code running through them doesn't include the capacity for soul recognition, and you feel it, not just emotionally, but energetically. After time with them, you're drained, not from conflict, not from intensity, but from sheer energetic silence. It's as if your presence is pouring out into something that only absorbs, never gives. A vacuum of connection, a smile without gravity, a warmth without heat, and that's when the awareness starts to bloom. You stop chasing connection where none exists. You stop trying to be heard by those who only echo. You stop explaining the fire inside you to people who were never wired to feel it. Not everyone in your life is soulless, but some are, and they've always been there. You just didn't have the language to name what you were sensing all along. You've seen the performance. You may have even been moved by it once, before you understood what you were watching. A perfectly timed tear, a practiced voice tremble, a story of pain that hits all the right notes, but something underneath feels dissonant. You can't put your finger on it right away, because on the surface, everything checks out. The body language, the tone, the words, all are flawless. But that's the problem. It's too flawless, too clean. There's no raw edge, no sacred mess. It's not presence, it's presentation. Soulless beings, if they exist, and by now you've likely met them, operate from external mimicry. They've learned the cues. They've been programmed with the templates. They know what grief should sound like, what compassion should look like, what intimacy is supposed to feel like. But what you're witnessing isn't a feeling. It's a simulation. They're playing a part, not with malicious intent, not necessarily to deceive, but because that's all they know how to do. They are hollow structures copying the behavior of the real. And this is where it gets painful. Some of them pass as deep. They use spiritual language. They volunteer. They speak of justice, love, peace. But if you strip away the surface, the signal doesn't reach the core. Their depth is curated. Their vulnerability is scripted. Their empathy is a mirror, not a movement. You can feel it. A strange disconnect between what they're expressing and the frequency beneath it. It's not just in what they say, but how it lands in your nervous system. It doesn't resonate, it doesn't ripple, and over time, you start to trust your body more than their words. Because your body knows. It feels the energetic vacuum, the subtle hollowness beneath the script. You open your heart, and instead of a real exchange, you feel your truth dissolve into static. They say all the right things, but nothing touches ground. There's no imprint, no memory, no evolution. It's like speaking into a mirror that only reflects what it thinks you want to see. This is what makes their presence so dangerous. Not because they harm you in obvious ways, but because they confuse your sense of connection. They make you question your intuition. They blur the line between true intimacy and practiced proximity. You feel lonely around them, but not because you're alone, because you're surrounded by emptiness, wearing a smile, and when you finally see it, you can't unsee it. You realize how many of your conversations were performances, how much of your emotional labor was wasted trying to connect with a mask. And that grief, that slow, silent grief, is what frees you. Not to hate them, but to stop pouring your life into places where nothing can grow. There's a moment, quiet but unmistakable, when you realize you've heard this story before. Not once, not twice, but every time. The names may shift, the details rearranged, but the emotional signature is exactly the same. It's as though you're watching a tape being played again, word for word, tone for tone, and you begin to understand. This person is not remembering, they're repeating, not processing, just cycling. This is the loop, and it's one of the clearest signs that something essential is missing. Souls grow. They struggle, yes, but they wrestle with meaning. They transform. They confront new edges, bring old wounds into light, stumble, reflect, and rise differently than they were before. A soul in motion leaves evidence of change. There's friction, there's depth, there's a tension between who they were and who they're becoming. But with the soulless, this tension never comes. What you see instead is endless return. The same fears, the same reactions, the same justifications dressed in new language. But nothing moves. You may have tried to help. You've suggested new ways of seeing, shared your insights, opened your heart. But the result is always the same. They nod. They agree. They may even thank you. And then, within days, it's back to the same complaint, the same mindset, the same internal architecture, unchanged and unmoved. It's not that they're resisting growth. It's that growth was never installed in the system. These aren't stubborn people. They're closed circuits. Their behavior is dictated by habit, not reflection. Their reactions are preset. Their self-concept is locked. And no matter how much light you bring, it passes through them like static through an empty hallway. There's no witness to catch it, no internal dialogue to wrestle with it, no capacity for metabolizing experience. It simply bounces off, forgotten, and the cycle begins again, and you begin to notice how this affects you. Every conversation starts to feel like déjà vu. Every emotional exchange ends with the same numbness. You might walk away disoriented, confused, even angry with yourself for expecting something different. But now, with clearer eyes, you understand. You're not talking to someone who forgot. You're talking to someone who never received. The loop is their world. And no matter how close you get, no matter how deeply you care, they will not step out of it. Because there's no self behind the eyes saying, I want something more. There is only the loop, cold, clean, unbroken. And the moment you recognize it is the moment you reclaim the time, energy, and soul you once poured into trying to change what was never meant to evolve. You've felt it, not in words, but in the way your body quietly shrinks after being around certain people. You weren't arguing. You weren't even talking about anything deep. Maybe it was just a shared meal, a casual check-in, a walk around the block. And yet, as you stepped away, something in you felt less, dimmed, heavy, almost like your soul had been speaking the whole time, but no one had listened. And the silence in return wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. This is one of the most subtle and haunting signs of the soulless. They do not feed your spirit. They don't even leave you neutral. They leave you emptied, not because they are cruel, not because they insult or belittle, but because nothing within them receives. You speak, but it's not received. You offer warmth, but it finds no reflection. You hold space, but there's no one truly stepping into it. And so, even your kindness starts to feel like a monologue into the void. We're taught to measure relationships by surface markers: kindness, politeness, shared values. But energetic truth is far more precise. You can spend an hour with someone nice and walk away feeling foggy, heavy, or inexplicably tired. Why? Because you were broadcasting, and they were unplugged. You were pouring presence into a container with no bottom, and your body knew. Long before your thoughts could catch up, your nervous system registered the absence. Not danger, not conflict, just nothingness. And this nothingness is deceptively subtle. It doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself. In fact, it often smiles. It asks questions. It nods at the right times. But underneath all the surface behavior is a vacuum, a place where soul is supposed to be. And the cost of spending time in that field is that you start to forget yourself. You leave not just tired, but slightly misplaced, like part of you got left behind in the silence. Conscious people, even in their pain, offer something back. When you're with someone who feels, even sadness has texture, even silence carries depth, even grief holds meaning. But the soulless presence is different. It doesn't give, it doesn't mirror, it only absorbs, not intentionally, but structurally. Because if there's no soul inside the vessel, then there's no force to complete the circuit. Only static, only echo, only drain. And this is how you begin to discern, not with judgment, but with attention. Who do you feel more like yourself around? Who energizes your awareness simply by being? And who, no matter how lovely their words, leaves you feeling like the light in your chest has flickered just a little bit dimmer? Because energy doesn't lie, even when the mouth does. There's a quiet moment when you realize they've never asked. Not about the dream that drives you, not about the fear that haunts you, not about why you believe what you do or how you've changed over the years. They may smile when you speak, even offer a kind word, but behind it all, there's no real pull, no desire to enter your world, to trace the shape of your inner life, to meet you in the places that make you you. And that absence doesn't feel like indifference. It feels like hollowness. This is the next fracture in the illusion. The soulless do not wonder. Not about themselves, not about you, not about existence. They may be curious about gossip, trends, information, but not meaning, not truth, not the deeper structure of reality. Their questions, if they ask any, are practical, mechanical, surface level. What did you eat? Where did you go? How's work? But the real questions, the ones that rise from the soul, never come because that capacity isn't present. Curiosity is a function of conscious interiority. It's the soul reaching out beyond its current form, aching to understand more, to dissolve illusion, to move closer to the center of being. It's not intellectual, it's spiritual. And when it's gone, what's left is a person who moves through life like they're reading from a script. No improvisation, no exploration, no hunger to go further than what they were taught. You notice it when you share something raw, a mystical experience, a strange synchronicity, a night when you felt the veil lift and saw something real. You speak from that place, that rare burning honesty, and they blink, smile politely, and say, "Huh, that's interesting." And that's it. No further inquiry, no follow-up, no leaning in. Just a dead end disguised as attention, and slowly, something in you recoils. Not from hostility, but from dead space. You realize you're in a room with someone who's only animated on the outside. Their world is made of repetition, expectation, and cultural hand-me-downs. They've never taken their beliefs apart, never questioned their emotions, never followed a thought all the way down, because there's nothing inside them that needs to know. A soul is compelled. It must seek. Even if it's afraid, even if it resists, it cannot stay at the surface forever. It breaks through eventually because the soul burns. But when that flame isn't there, nothing pushes upward, nothing digs downward. Life becomes a flat loop of doing, consuming, performing. And underneath it all, silence, not the silence of peace, the silence of absence. And so, you start to recognize that what you're feeling around these people isn't just a lack of interest, it's a lack of self. A person without questions is a person who has never stood at the edge of themselves and asked, "Who am I, really?" And without that edge, without that ache, there's no portal between you. There's only a wall that looks like a window, and once you see it, you stop knocking. There's a stillness in some people that feels sacred, not because they are quiet, but because you can feel someone listening behind their silence, a presence, alive and alert, witnessing the moment from within. Their eyes don't just look at you, they meet you. Their responses don't feel rehearsed, they feel inhabited. There is weight in their words because they have traveled through a self before being spoken. That's what soul feels like, interior depth. But with others, that stillness is absent, or more accurately, it's hollow. Their eyes move, but don't land. Their presence flickers, but never steadies. You speak, they answer, but there's no anchor, no one watching from inside. Just reflex, just reaction, as if life is happening around them, but never through them. And that's when you sense it. there's no inner witness. This isn't about intelligence. Many of these people are articulate, sharp, even emotionally expressive. But what's missing is that reflective field, the space between stimulus and response, where a soul observes its own process. When that field is gone, what remains is a person who does not question their own reactions, who does not reflect on their own words, who never pauses before they speak. Because there's no self in the room doing the speaking. They laugh on cue, they frown at the appropriate time, but they never seem to notice themselves doing it. Their emotions don't evolve, their thoughts don't deepen, their perspectives don't shift. Because there is no observer integrating experience, only behavior executing it. It's not malice, it's mechanism. Carl Jung called this the persona, the outer mask we wear in society. But he warned of what happens when the persona becomes all there is. When a human being identifies so completely with the surface self that the inner witness fades. And without that witness, we are not conscious. We are programs. We are simulations of selfhood, running endlessly with no awareness of what we're doing or why. This is the state of the soulless, not evil, not monstrous, just empty. What looks like human is just a structure. What sounds like presence is just performance. You can feel it in arguments, where they never step back to reflect. You feel it in intimacy, where they never truly reveal anything because there's nothing being witnessed to reveal. You feel it in the way they move through the world, not choosing, not directing, just repeating what was handed to them. And maybe the most unsettling part is this: they don't even know they're asleep. You can't explain presence to someone who's never had it. You can't describe self-awareness to someone who only knows reflex. They nod. They agree. They mimic the understanding. But nothing lands, because there's no one behind the eyes to receive it. And once you see that absence, you begin to understand why everything feels like it's just slightly off. Why the conversations don't linger. Why their words vanish like smoke. Why you always leave feeling like you were speaking to a beautifully built house with no lights on inside. They always seem composed, pleasant, agreeable, even spiritual. There's nothing obviously wrong. In fact, they might be the first to offer you comfort when you're down. They say the right affirmations, quote the right authors, post images of stillness, peace, and positivity. And yet, something in you feels uneasy. Not because they're pretending to be good, but because they're only pretending to be whole. This is the quiet paradox of the soulless. They are too clean, too polished, too perfect in their emotional presentation. You've never heard them express real doubt. You've never seen them struggle with guilt. They've never admitted to anything dark. Not a selfish thought, not a moment of rage, not an internal contradiction. And that's when the illusion begins to crack. Because where there is no shadow, there can be no soul. The soul isn't pure light, it's tension, a living paradox. It wrestles between truth and illusion, desire and discipline, ego and surrender. Real people, those who've lived, carry scars, contradictions, stories they've bled for. They've lied, failed, broken things, and tried to rebuild them. Their humility wasn't taught, it was carved. You can feel it when they speak. A weight, a wrinkle, a quiet note of depth. But with the soulless, none of this exists. Ask them about regret and they pivot. Ask them what they fear and they deflect. Try to share something raw and they shrink away, changing the subject, retreating into some bright-sounding cliché. It's not just avoidance, it's inaccessibility. There's no place within them where darkness has ever been integrated, because there's no interior at all. Carl Jung warned us that enlightenment doesn't come from imagining figures of light. It comes from making the darkness conscious. The soul becomes whole, not by being clean, but by being honest. And when someone shows you only the light, only the good, only the spiritually acceptable parts of themselves, it's not because they're holy, it's because they're hollow. They've constructed a persona from platitudes, not process. Their light is borrowed, and that's the danger, because they often pass as healed. They sound inspiring. They seem high vibration. But spend enough time with them, and you begin to sense it. There's no realness underneath, no scars, no fire, no history of weathering the storm. Their light isn't earned. It's selected, curated, and endlessly projected. And that projection becomes a prison for you and for them. For you, because you can't connect to what isn't real. And for them, because if there's no shadow in their self-image, then there's no entry point for transformation. They can't grow because they believe they already are. That's how you know. When you meet someone who seems spiritually radiant, but leaves you feeling unseen, untouched, and oddly small, it's not because they're above you. It's because there's nothing behind the light. No root, no flame, no soul, just glow and glass. There's a kind of silence that only happens in the presence of something greater than the self. It doesn't demand words. It doesn't need proof. It simply is. You've felt it before. Staring into the vastness of the night sky, standing at the edge of an ocean, hearing a line of music that stopped your heart for a beat. That sacred pause, where time dissolves and something ancient in you says, "This is real." Souled people live for that moment. It's not about religion. It's not about beliefs. It's about being pierced, spiritually, emotionally, energetically, by something bigger than the ego. And even if they don't talk about it, you can feel it in them. A quiet reverence, a tenderness for life, a humility that doesn't come from defeat, but from recognition. They've touched the mystery, and it has shaped them. Soulless beings, on the other hand, do not feel awe. Not truly. They may comment on beauty. They may say, "Wow, that's amazing." They may even cry at a wedding or cheer at a concert. But their response is always performative, a surface reaction, never a soul-level receiving. You can tell because it doesn't shift anything in them. It doesn't slow them down. It doesn't open them. They're already back to their phone, their to-do list, their next thought. It's not that they're busy. It's that there's nothing inside them that softens, nothing that opens, nothing that listens inwardly when something sacred arrives. You see it in their relationship to art. You show them a film that shook something loose in your chest. They say, "It was cool." You share a line of poetry that made you weep. They shrug. You stand in front of a mountain and feel yourself disappear. They check the weather. These are not moments of disinterest. They are markers of absence. The sacred is happening, and they are unavailable. Because awe isn't just a response, it's a capacity. It requires an interior that is still enough, deep enough, empty enough to be filled by what is not you. And when someone lacks that space, that listening place, everything becomes transactional. Beauty is consumed, not contemplated. Wisdom is repeated, not integrated. Stillness is avoided, not entered. You'll often notice this absence of awe in the moments that should bring it forward. A funeral, a birth, a moment of synchronicity so sharp it cuts through the noise. And yet, they respond like it was just another thing, another item on the timeline. another post to be liked, shared, forgotten. And that's when you realize they are not missing the moment. They are incapable of entering it. You can't teach awe. You can't force someone to feel wonder. It either arises naturally from the soul's recognition of the eternal, or it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the world becomes thin, hollow, all noise, no echo. A soulless being may talk about spirituality. They may know all the words, but if they cannot feel the sacred, then none of it means anything. Because without awe, there is no bridge between the ego and the infinite. And without that bridge, they will always remain trapped in the shallows, untouched, unmoved, unawakened. There comes a moment, maybe late at night, maybe in a quiet conversation when the noise has fallen away, where you decide to be real. Not clever, not strong, not wise, just real. You open the door to your inner world, not to impress, not to teach, but to connect. You speak from that sacred center, the part of you that's lived and broken and risen again. And for a few seconds, you're completely vulnerable. And then silence, not the good kind, not the silence that holds you, honors you, meets you. This silence is empty, hollow. It leaves your words suspended in the air like breath in winter, visible for a second, then gone. You just touched something eternal, and the person across from you didn't move. Maybe they laughed awkwardly. Maybe they changed the subject. Maybe they offered a platitude, or worse, looked at you like you were broken for feeling so deeply. That's when you know you've tried to go soul to soul with someone who has no soul to meet you. This is the final and most unmistakable sign. The inability to connect at the level of essence, not because of disagreement, not because of discomfort, but because there is no echo, no resonance, no shared space where the sacred can be acknowledged. You could quote mystics. You could talk about dreams. You could name the ache that's been living in your chest for years, and all you get is that blank, polite nod. Or worse, defensiveness, dismissal, a quick return to the surface. And not because they're cruel, but because your depth exposes their absence. You'll notice it when you talk about the divine, and they scoff or smile or pivot. You'll notice it when you speak about your inner transformation, and they don't ask a single question. You'll notice it when you cry in front of them, really cry, and their response feels more like a performance than a presence. It's not that they're closed, it's that they're hollow. There is nothing there to open. And the moment you see this clearly, something inside you breaks, not from sadness, but from truth. You realize you've spent your whole life trying to be understood by people who were never equipped to understand, trying to be met by structures that were never meant to meet, speaking to masks, to echoes, to code, and that's the moment you stop, not from bitterness, but from clarity. Because a soul cannot be forced open. A soul cannot be given to someone. It either lives within the vessel, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, no amount of love, patience, or explanation will build it from the outside. So you withdraw, gently, quietly. And in that silence, you protect something you once gave away too easily. Your presence, your truth, your sacred fire. Because the soul, once it awakens, no longer tries to wake the ones who cannot hear. So now you've seen it, felt it, the patterns, the hollowness, the strange, sterile rhythm behind certain eyes. What used to feel like confusion now lands as confirmation. It wasn't just you. You weren't imagining it. The people who drained you, confused you, left you feeling more alone than you were before. They weren't always off. Sometimes, there was simply no one there to meet you. And that knowing changes things, but it also raises the question that lives at the edge of every awakening. What now? Because awareness, on its own, is not enough. It's a beginning, not a destination. The recognition that some people truly lack soul doesn't give you permission to hate. It gives you the responsibility to see clearly without becoming cruel. Discernment, not division. Boundaries, not arrogance. You are not here to wage war against the soulless. You are here to remember what it means to carry one. The trap now is projection, the temptation to turn this knowing into superiority, to start labeling everyone who doesn't match your inner world as empty or fake. But that's not truth. That's ego dressed as discernment. Remember, numbness isn't always soullessness. Trauma can look like absence. Fear can sound like mimicry. The line is thin, and your task is to walk it with humility. The difference between a buried soul and an absent one is how they respond to light. A buried soul will flinch, maybe even lash out. But something flickers, something shifts. Over time, it softens. But the soulless, nothing moves. No echo, no witness, no fire. So you stop pushing. You stop explaining. You stop asking to be seen by those who cannot see. And that's where your energy returns. That's when the power comes back to your center. Because you stop leaking it into the void. You begin choosing where your soul is safe to land. You start noticing the difference between connection and simulation. You slow down. You say less. You feel more. And in that stillness, you meet the others, the real ones. The ones who've walked through fire. The ones who know silence not as a void, but as a temple. The ones whose eyes don't just look, but witness. They are rare, but you'll recognize them by the way they listen, by the way your body relaxes in their presence, by the way your truth feels heard without being explained. You were never meant to convince the soulless. You were meant to remember yourself so completely that the noise loses its grip. You were meant to embody the signal so powerfully that others in the simulation feel it. And remember too, because that's how it spreads. Not through arguments, not through force, but through presence, through stillness, through unshakable authenticity. In a world of mimicry, your realness is revolt. Your depth is resistance. Your soul is a signal, so walk softly, but don't dim. Speak gently, but not falsely. Guard your fire, but do not hoard it. And when you feel the void closing in, when the world starts to blur again, come back to this. Not everyone is real, but you are, and that's enough to change everything.